Hi, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to this new episode of the Rise Up Radio. And today I have with me a new guest. His name is Thach Nguyen. Thach, welcome to the Rise Up Radio.
Thank you for having me, Ashish.
Absolutely. Pleasure is all ours. Folks, a little bit about Thach. He's the managing partner at Plenty Search, and they've worked with over 400 companies in this executive search space, and he's been instrumental in helping early stage startups to find the right talent and help them grow and scale. Thach, this is a very, very hard job, and I'm going to talk more about it. But folks, in his earlier stints, he's also worked with fast-growing companies like Airbnb. He was, leading the HR function and helped the company scale from 700 to 6,000 employees. And that must have been a challenging assignment as well.
Yeah, I've definitely been in jobs that have not been nine to five.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
pretty evident. Awesome. So, that why don't you talk a little bit about your journey and your experience of building HR functions, scaling organizations, finding the right talent, a little bit about your experience to our audience, and then I'll introduce the topic that we have for today, and I'll move on to some of the questions that I have, especially in store for you.
that sounds great. If it's okay, Ashish, I'd like to start a little bit on the personal side. I like to
Please.
start this way because it's a really big part of who I am. But I was born in Vietnam. I moved over to the United States when I was 3 or 4 years old with my
Hmm.
family.
Hmm.
My family, we were literally homeless
Hmm.
in Vietnam. Like we lived in a little shed without a roof
Hmm.
over our heads. Luckily for me, I was too young to really notice it and
Yeah.
impact me. So I don't want to come off like this is too much of a sob story, but definitely like humble beginnings for sure.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, work has always been an incredibly important part of who I am.
Hmm.
Some may say, people who know me well, maybe too important of a part, like I need to learn to have a little bit more balance. But I just think that having purpose, being passionate about what you do,
Yeah.
if you have the privilege of loving what you do so much that you do it for free, like that's
Correct.
what I think is what I've always aspired to. And so a little bit about my background professionally. One thing that's kind of interesting that people don't realize when looking at it is every single job I've ever had in my career, I've gone subsequently smaller and smaller and smaller, and that's
Hmm.
probably not an accident. My very
Hmm.
first job out of school was at the Walt Disney Company, literally hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
From there, I worked at Google.
Yeah.
I think at that time we were 30 or 40,000,
Hmm.
smaller than today, but
Yeah.
not small. Then I joined Airbnb. I want to clarify one thing you said is sheesh. I wasn't the head of HR there, but I was a part of the HR leadership team and I joined
Yeah.
early. When I joined, we were 700 people.
Hmm.
When I left, were 6,000 people. And so hyper growth. From there, I joined a 90-person startup and then a 30-person startup called Sword Health. And then I founded my own company. So I definitely have gravitated towards smaller and smaller organizations because I think every time I've gotten a bite of what it feels like to work somewhere smaller and more
Yeah.
nimble, I've loved it
Enjoyed
and
it
I've
even
wanted to
more.
go even further. Exactly. So I'm a masochist.
Yeah. I was about to ask you, but I think I can totally relate with that. And interesting, Tak, you mentioned, your background and, born in Vietnam and then grew up in the US. I think culturally speaking, I can totally relate coming from Vietnam and I'm from India, right? Hard work is the cornerstone of our cultures, isn't it? Right? I mean, that's basically
Yeah.
kind of bred into us right from the childhood as generations have grown, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I was not prepared to talk about this, but I'm happy to because I'm really passionate about this topic. Like absolutely, I value it so much. I value it so much in other people. Again, like I said, sometimes to a fault. Like I think that it has led to some negative impact. But
Hmm.
I think it's something I really care about. And it makes me really sad that I don't think it's valued as much
Yeah.
today. Like I don't think that if you were an American growing up, born in 2025 or,
Yeah.
in the last decade or two, I think there's been a little bit of a pushback and part of it is political, part of it is social. And it it's been a difficult challenge navigating that
Hmm.
as a people leader
Yep.
because at one end, I really want to respect that this newer generation, I think, values
Right.
more work-life balance and values sort of protecting themselves more and
Yep.
not sacrificing too much.
Mm.
But it's been a challenge for me because that's so at odds with my DNA and what I was taught growing up as like this is what you do to get ahead,
Right.
or this is what is important in a person.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think we're digressing. This is not the topic, but I think this is a very interesting topic, right? So I think more and more generations, the way they come, and the workplace is going to change very drastically. And I think organizations need to start preparing in terms of when this Gen Alpha comes into the workforce. How would the workplace look like? How would the organization itself look like? Right? I think the nature of work it's going to change rapidly as in the coming decades, for sure.
Yeah, I love this topic. Again, this is another one where it's such a big topic. We can spend hours on it. I think that the thing that jumps to mind primarily is I just think for all of us in leadership positions, we
Right.
have to be incredibly nimble and we have to have a lot of humility right now. Like I
Yeah.
think about our parents' generation and the internet and the iPhone, like it makes me really sad. I was with my mom a couple weeks ago and
Yeah.
she still doesn't know how to like silence her phone, right? Like
Right.
she
Right.
uses her phone, right? And like it's a huge part of her life. You can't,
Yeah.
no matter who you are, you can't. I think no matter what generation, you can't avoid that a mobile phone is now a big part of your life. But like
Right.
he only knows how to use it to use basic things like phone calls and text messages.
Yep.
It doesn't really use her phone, and actually made me very sad because I think that we just didn't realize how important the technology would be to her life. And I think
Mm.
she now feels very insecure and she's in her 70s. And so she feels like it's a little late for her to learn.
Yep.
And I want us to have that same humility where in 10, 20, 30 years, there will be an equivalent technology where
That's
you and
correct.
I, Ashish, like
Absolutely.
if
We're
we
gonna
don't learn
be
how to use
outdated.
it,
Yeah. Absolutely.
right, and I want to learn from like my our parents' generation where they thought, oh, this silly thing, how important is it going to be? And it ends up being really important. And so
Yeah.
I think we should be very humble. Like we should try to learn AI as though we were children, right?
Totally agree with
We
you.
should try to be curious as though we're children. Where it's going to go, I'm not going to make that prediction because
Yep.
they're way smarter people than me making predictions. But what I do know is that I'm trying to be a student again,
Mm.
which is
Mm.
hard to do in your
Yep.
30s and
Right.
40s, right? Like
Right.
we haven't had to be students in
Correct.
a while.
Correct. No, absolutely. Cool. Awesome. So, Tak, I'm going to jump into the topic for today. And folks, the topic for today we're discussing with Tak is the human element, involved when organizations are growing and when they're growing very, very fast, right? It's very easy to miss the human element, when you're growing fast because a lot of focus is on growth, metrics, performance, raising the next round. But Tak, tell us about your experience of working with young companies. Let's say a company has raised Series A, they're on the growth path. What are the core imperatives from the people side in such an organization? Apart from hiring, of course, I think that's going to be core.
Yeah.
But in general, I think what do you think are the core pillars on which the organization can build itself at this stage?
Yeah, of course. So there's so many different ways to take the topic. I think the first one that comes to mind is when you're an early organization like that, everything you do is so fragile, and the things you choose to do, the things you don't choose to do, are going to impact it for the next
Mm.
5, 10 years as you scale from 100 to 1,000 people. And so just being aware that it's about creating a foundation in the beginning. The specific foundation I like to always think about, and probably the one I talk to the most with founders, is I think we as founders, right, care a lot around founders and people leaders. We care a lot about building high performance cultures.
Yep.
That's something I hear
Yep.
about all the time.
Yep. Yep.
Performance,
Yep.
drive,
Yep.
and I think that performance is, I think of it a lot like a muscle.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something you build overnight. It's
Mm.
something that you have to work at day in and day out. There is going to be no light switch to building a performance culture.
Yep.
And I want to admit and confess that I've learned this the hard way.
Mm.
So when we're at Airbnb, one thing that is really special about Airbnb, and you can probably see it from like the branding and the
Mm.
marketing, is it is such a mission-driven company. It is
Mm.
a company where our mission is to create a world where you can belong anywhere. And so
Yep.
what that inevitably meant was the culture was very rah-rah, very positive,
Makes sense.
very like high five, we're
Right.
in this together. But I think to a fault, like I think that in our goal of having this very cheerleading, aspirational, inspirational company, we didn't drive performance enough. And so what
Mm.
actually happened was oftentimes people kind of got a gold star for showing up at work, right?
Mm.
They get raises and promotions for just like being at the right place, right time, being an early
Yeah.
employee. And it was not until we were actually preparing for IPO
Mm.
where like we had a, furious, big
Yep.
time CFO who came in and was
Yep.
like, we need to be profitable. We need to drive performance. We need to do more with less. We have to be much more cognizant of our
Correct.
resources and headcount. And that was a big shift for the company. Like I
Mm.
said earlier, a performance culture is something you don't do overnight, right? We basically
Yep.
tried to do it overnight. We tried to do what in years companies, what
There you
should
go.
take company years, we did in months. And that was probably the hardest year in Airbnb history.
Yeah.
Our Glassdoor scores dipped like crazy with horrible retention. There were forums inside that were just like people complaining, saying
Yep.
that like the culture had lost its
Very
way
natural.
when
Very
really
natural.
we were just adulting. And so this is all a long-winded way of saying that I think that when I work with founders, like I think in all aspects of culture, but specifically
Yeah.
performance, like thinking about it really early and putting in
Matters a lot.
steps to really develop that like a muscle.
So, Tak, let's dig deeper into that, right?
Mhm.
What is performance, right? How would you define performance at an early stage company?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Let me go a level deeper. So I think that before you go with like the bells and whistles, there's a lot of technology out there. People are trying different things like eliminating performance reviews, doing them more often, all these things. I would say that is step two. Step
Hmm.
one is the basics, right? Like
Hmm.
before using a gym analogy, before trying to figure out to do all the fancy moves, like let's get your bench press. Let's get
Yeah.
like your squats in order. And for me, it's about having regular performance conversations.
Hmm.
It's around uh, giving and providing feedback on a regular basis, right?
Hmm.
When things go well, when projects go well, like systematizing that.
Yeah.
So if I was a founder or head of HR for a startup, a minimum, I probably do quarterly performance reviews. A minimum, I would probably do monthly
Yeah.
conversations about feedback, like
Yeah.
what's going well, what's not going well, sheesh, like what are things you want to
Yeah.
grow in. And then lastly, I would make sure that you are identifying who
Yeah.
are your high performers, right? In an
Yeah.
organization of 100 people, you should assume that you have like 5 or 10 people who are like, these are the future leaders of the company. And
Hmm.
like, what are you specifically doing to stretch
Yeah.
them? Because
Yeah.
we'll go into this at some point today. One of the biggest learning lessons I've had throughout my career is people are way more fungible than you
Hmm.
give them credit for.
Hmm.
And I think that the best companies are the ones who identify who are your really good, excellent high potential people and how do you throw tremendous responsibility at them. And
Hmm.
I think the companies that fail are the ones where it's like, just because you haven't done this before, it's too much of a risk when to
Right.
hire someone over you.
Hmm.
So yeah, getting excellent at that.
Got it. So, when you talk of having these conversations, Stack, isn't it necessary that you have a foundation done, which is setting an expectation that, hey, what is my expectation from you as an individual in terms of performance, right? So, which is setting very clear goals, which are measurable, making sure that, those goals are tracked on a continuous basis. And obviously, in a fast moving environment, goals are going to change, right? So, are you
Yeah.
nimble enough to be able to keep changing the goals as well? And there's a lot of movement that happens around measuring performance, but also what performance is at the end, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I do think that in a large company, that stuff can get really hard, right? When
Hmm.
you're in the thousands of people. I saw
Yeah,
this all the time at
yeah,
Airbnb and
right,
Google, where like the goals that you had to be in a quarter, by the end of the quarter, things had changed so much that
correct,
the goals were no
right.
longer relevant. I feel like this one thing that I feel really passionate about is when you're in startups, oftentimes people talk about startups in a negative way, like, oh,
Yeah,
it's harder, it's more chaotic, the
yeah,
resources are fewer, people are
yep,
paid below comp, right? Sure, all those things are true. there's a ton of advantages that startups have.
Hmm.
And one of those advantages is in a startup environment, you have a much better idea of who's
Hmm.
doing what and who's driving
Right.
impact, right? If not 1,000 people, if it's 30, 40, 50 people, you
Yeah.
know who are the people driving the company. And so I agree that like structure is important, absolutely
Hmm.
structure. But I also think as a leader, as a founder, it's your job to be paying just really close attention and being
Correct.
very nimble because you should have visibility into like the
Yeah.
work that people have done
Right.
and using that to your advantage
Yeah.
and not being so kind of rigid around like what were these specific things checked off
Hmm.
in the goals.
Yeah. Well,
Did
so
that make sense?
normally, when you're talking to a founder who's, let's say, leading a fast-growing company, they would often say that, you know what, I personally don't have a time to put everything in place and make sure that it's happening. And that's where, let's say, a head of HR comes in, right? Or somebody
Mm,
who's leading the function. So, what is the right time for you to get in somebody in the role of a head of HR, for example?
yeah. So
And
the
not only to
industry
do
average.
hiring, by the way, not only to do hiring, because there's so many other things that need to be put in place,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Oh, I totally agree. In fact, I would say the common one of the most common mistakes I see is that people hire in a what they call a head of HR, but they really just want that person to do recruiting. And
Recruiting, yeah.
I've just seen that that makes that much less successful in
Correct.
my eyes. You want a full stack HR person. The industry average time to bring in a head of HR is
Hmm,
around 50 headcount.
hmm,
I think that the organizations that bring in even earlier, like
hmm.
30, 25 people, I have seen um, an advantage, right? Like they're investing in those
Right.
foundation earlier. And so if your P&L can uh, j- uh, can justify it, I would recommend bringing it early. However, I also recognize that every startup's like capital situation is different, and that may
Right.
not be possible. If
Hmm,
you don't have the luxury of bringing in a head of HR earlier, like I mentioned earlier, there's so like the foundational pieces you do not need a head of HR to do, right?
hmm.
So
Yeah.
if you don't have the luxury of being a head of HR until like 50, 75 people, the minimum as a founder, every single person on your leadership team, you should be having regular conversations around like, what are you doing well? What are you doing well? What do you enjoy doing? And like, I like to think of the role of a leader as you're a coach, not a manager, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you, for senior people, you shouldn't be telling them like
Correct.
do A, do B. They hopefully know enough to do
Correct.
that. Like you want to think of them. I keep using this gym analogy of like a coach, right? It should be kind of painful, right? You should
True.
be constantly stretching them and like thinking of what like their limits are. So,
True. And that's where I think if founders can start coaching the next in line to do the same with their teams, they're going to delegate a lot of this responsibility, right? So every line manager can become a coach for their own teams, right? It's not only the founder's
yeah.
responsibility, and then things can scale up easily and faster, isn't it?
I love that you mentioned that. This is actually one of the things I did plan on talking about, which is absolutely. I think that it's a cascading waterfall
Yeah.
effect. It's I I believe that NT Search, my company, that's what's has happened. Like I invest a lot of time
Hmm.
being that coach with
Hmm.
my direct reports, and what that means is like even if something goes really well, like we talk like great, like let's reinforce it. What went well, let's celebrate.
Correct.
But there's always room for improvement, right? Like a
Right.
coach, right? Like
Right.
a coach is never going to let you say, all right, you
Absolutely.
did great. There's no more room for improvement. And I view that time, even though it is really time consuming, I view it as an investment because I also know that I'm
True.
teaching them how I want them to be
Correct.
working with their direct reports and then vice versa, and then consequently down and down. Having said that, though, one thing I want to call out, and if there are founders listening here, HR leaders, I would probably say 95% of founders I work with are not great people leaders. It's
Hmm.
quite ironic, right?
Hmm.
The biggest leader in the organization is
Is
a
not a good people manager or people leader themselves.
right. And so I would say that like if you're a founder listening to this, I think having self-awareness is important and
Yeah.
assume you're part of that 95%. And how
Right.
do you get out of that 95%? Because I think it's going to pay dividends for your organization.
Absolutely.
And I just don't think there's been an investment in it. I don't think there's been an emphasis on it as a like
Right.
as a tech ecosystem. I don't think it's
Right.
something that we valued in tech
Yeah.
founders.
I think that's where things can really happen if founders can get a coach for themselves and probably kind of get some coaching support or talent development or learning and development support for the managers, right? So that they can become better coaches and better talent developers within their own small sub microcosms in the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I'm a huge believing in coaching. I'm gonna share something
Please.
potentially controversial, if it's okay. I also know that coaching is expensive. I also know that not every organization has the luxury of that, although I think it's worth every dollar and the ROI is there. If you don't have a coach, get a therapist.
Yeah.
I think that they serve a lot of not the same, right? There,
Hmm.
I know that they're different,
Hmm.
but they have the a lot of the same underlying principles, which is
Principles, yeah.
having a lot of self-awareness, right?
Correct.
Like being
Correct.
really introspective. For me, I've been on quite a journey as a manager and as a people leader.
Yeah.
When I first became a manager 10 years ago, I thought I was a really good manager. I was not. Like I thought I was a good manager, and you know why, Ashish? It's because I'm like a good people person. Like I've always been social, like
Hmm.
party. I talk,
Hmm.
got along with everyone. So I assumed, oh yeah, like if I'm extrovert and social, I must be a great manager. That is
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely not. I learned the hard way. I learned the hard way because my first ever like 360 anonymous surveys for my direct reports, it was red across the board.
Wow.
And even though they're like he's likable, right?
Yeah.
Like he's fun, but like
But I don't want
he's
to work with
too
him.
intense.
But I don't want to
Yeah,
work with him.
exactly. Exactly. And I had to really like therapy and just like talking to like my therapist around just like understanding like my strengths and weaknesses lots
Correct.
over time. I still have those same weaknesses.
Yeah.
Like I don't think they'll ever disappear, but I've been able to really refine it. And I've been able to do a lot of that actually via therapy, in
Yeah.
addition to coaching.
I think self-awareness brings in a lot of this aspect because you become aware that hey, you know what, I might be doing this again, so I better watch out. I
Yeah.
shouldn't repeat it. Correct.
Yeah. But it's hard, like I will tell you that like I'm this is actually kind of a difficult thing for me to share because
Mm.
at that time, 10 years ago, I remember like when I first got those, I couldn't sleep for several
Mm.
days. Like
Yeah.
it was so earth-shattering,
Mm.
but enough time has passed.
Correct.
And I've done the work to really just accept and like now I can talk back about it fondly, but it was hard. And I think that if you ask people who work for me today, I'm not a perfect leader, but I would just say they probably I've made improvements in that area.
Mm. Mm. Absolutely. And how's your journey been as a founder now? Because coming with that baggage and that mental thought process, and being a founder, you have to be empathetic with people as well. You have to basically take everyone along. You have to be a little bit democratic as well, depending on situations. So how are you balancing everything uh, around that particular aspect?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a couple things. I think the first thing as a founder that's been really unique for me is I've had a lot of I think insecurity and probably even imposter syndrome as a
Mm.
founder because
Mm.
I'm not the typical founder archetype.
Mm.
If you look at the majority of founders out there, they are a product person who turned
Mm.
into a founder, an
Mm.
ops person, an
Mm.
engineer who turned founder,
Yeah.
right? People who are more traditionally more product focused, right? I'm an HR person.
Mm.
I have a recruiting and HR background. There's not a lot of us. There's a few, but there's not a lot. And
Mm.
so I've always felt a little insecure that I'm part of I'm part of a minority and that it was at a real gap. But
Yeah.
4 years in, actually Plenty's 4 year anniversary was this week. My realization has been that's actually been a real strength, not
Mm.
a weakness of
Mm.
mine, because uh, you know, like I mentioned earlier, most founders are not great people
Correct.
leaders, and
Correct.
this is my craft. It's something I think a lot about.
Yeah.
I think about the team all the time. I
Yeah.
actually think about the team more often than I think about like product and
Yeah.
customers.
Yeah.
Like I
Awesome.
sleep, you think about like Amira, like what's
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
development, what's her gap, when to give her feedback on this. And
Mm.
so that's been a really exciting part of the journey. To answer your question more directly, Ashish, around like that transition and being democratic and listening to all voices,
Mm.
I two words come to mind. So I think I've always been someone who does value like democracy,
Mm.
values making sure that I get buy-in from
Mm.
everybody. That's something that
Yeah.
like previously I've always valued, and so I
Yeah.
continue to value. But the additional
Mm.
the change as being a founder is I also have come to realize that there's importance in having like a real vision and having discipline in that vision.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I've combined that democratic, alignment
Makes
oriented
sense.
aspect with also realizing that like sometimes if I believe really strongly in something, I have to be disciplined in
And
that
that
and
decisiveness is important, right?
and I think employees value it.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, there've actually been
if you're in doubt, then your team is in doubt completely, right? So
yeah
there has to be some kind of decisiveness from your side for your team to take you seriously and believe in you as well.
yeah yeah. Can I give you an example? So I
Yes.
think the one that for me that's probably been the biggest is performance. Once
Mm.
again, there have been a couple of instances in plenty where a professional services recruiting firm, right? Like our people are our product. Like
Mm.
performance is
Right.
so important. Like it is
Right.
our product. There have been a couple of instances where, we have really high expectations. Like we work with demanding customers, like they expect a lot
Yep.
of us, and so we have to expect
Yep.
a lot of ourselves. And there have been instances where, like, balls were dropped or we didn't operate with the level of like quality that we expected. And there's been some pushback from the team, from my
Mm.
leaders, where they're like, well, like this is a lot. Like that's
Mm.
expecting a lot,
Mm.
and like the human side of me, and I really believe in being human. I'm not perfect either. I was like, that is a lot. Like that's
Yep.
like am I asking for perfection, right?
Yep.
But in those instances, like through a lot of trials and tribulations, a lot of making mistakes, I've come to realize like, no, I don't think that's asking too much. Like I think in order to be excellent, we need to expect a lot of ourselves.
That.
We
Yeah.
have to provide support and we have
Mm.
to provide room to fail. But in specific categories, I've been disciplined, keyword, where I'm like, this is an area where I'm not willing to budge
Yep.
because this is what makes us different and special. And it's taken 4 years,
Yep.
but I've gotten a much clearer on when and where those
Yeah.
areas are where I'm not willing to budge.
That's a journey. That's a journey, Dak. Also, so tell me, when organizations are scaling up, I think one of the most important aspects of scaling up the culture is how the people managers, how the next in line shape up, right? We touched upon it briefly. Especially when you talk of performance, it's not only the founder that can lead that discussion, but every people manager then needs to start leading that discussion. And a lot of times there is a talk that should we hire experienced managers from outside, or should we groom people managers within? ICs were doing wonderfully well. Shall we promote them? And what's your take on that? Where should we go? Is it a balance? And if you're promoting from
Yeah.
within, how do you support ICs transitioning into people management because they have never managed teams before and they're going to make mistakes, they're going to fail. So how do you balance everything up?
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm sure you know my answer. It is a balance, right? I think the key in life is balance in almost
Hmm.
every way. And so it's not either or. However, the key question is where on that spectrum, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
I am of the belief that although you need both external and internal talent, right? Like developing as well as bring people from the outside, I lean more towards internal.
Hmm.
So number one, the
Hmm.
research supports it, right? Individuals who are internally promoted are significantly more likely to be successful than
Yeah.
individuals who are externally hired. The
Yeah.
research will support that. And I've also seen it in my own anecdotal data.
Yeah.
So at Airbnb, our head of recruiting, Jill, was the very first recruiter on the team, joined, I think, when the company was 150 employees,
Okay.
grew us to 5,000 and a team of
Yeah.
100 people and did it
Yeah.
gracefully and successfully. And to this day, someone I admire.
Yeah.
Joe Bach, our head of product, was our first product hire.
Hmm.
Riley, our head of data science, our first data science hire. I see time and time again where if you create the right environment, these people
Yeah.
will succeed. Don't think that there was anything. I mean, these are special individuals, but I don't think there was anything special about Airbnb that were like, we managed to find these incredible first
Hmm.
hire. I think it was just
Hmm.
that we created an environment where
Right.
people like we believed and were willing to take a bet in people. And this is kind of what I mentioned earlier. I think
Hmm.
organizations in general need to veer more towards this than automatically assuming this person has never done the job. Let me go hire an executive search for my
Right.
country to do it. Um, given that, your second part is how do you support them, right? This
Absolutely.
one is a little harder. I
Mm.
don't have a clear cut defined answer. I actually would love your thoughts, on this, Sheesh, but like what I have seen is um like giving them mentors and coaching, right?
Yeah.
That's one part which we already talked about. I think the other part too is making sure that um, they are like that where they are lacking, like 'cause by design they've never done this job before.
Yeah.
You hire people who have sort of the again self-awareness and like the confidence to hire
Mm.
people who are better than them and
Yep.
be able to augment in the areas where they don't have that technical expertise.
Yeah.
Jill did that, right? Like she hired people who on paper could have been her boss and could have been very threatening to her, but I think she knew that she had the organization support, and she also was a really mature and confident individual to like continue hiring better and better people. What do you think? I would love your thoughts on that
Yeah, I
answer,
think
Story.
it's a combination of multiple things as per me, Dak. I think definitely, first of all, evaluating people if they have that self-awareness or not, right? Or at least helping them build that self-awareness because that is very, very critical. If you don't know where you're going wrong, you're never gonna, improve on any parameter. And I think for me, the support system is a combination of coaching, is a combination of helping them build those skills, make mistakes, and constant feedback loop that goes back into the people management skills as well. It's a muscle that you develop over a period of time, right? It's the same way that you do multiple reps. They don't know how to give feedback, so put them in a situation where they have to give feedback to their team members. Learn from that feedback loop, and keep correcting and keep improving. But I think it's very important that this demographic gets that constant handled support so that whenever they're making a mistake, they come out stronger out of it rather than getting demoralized that, hey, you know what? I'm not cut out for people management. I am better at, doing an IC's role and then go back. I think that's where the balance and providing that ecosystem in the organization, either it could be from the senior leaders in the organization itself, or maybe coming from outside, like you said, mentors, coaches, or maybe some sort of training program, could provide that support as well.
I agree everything you said. Like it's so interesting. Like these HR systems, they're interconnected, right? Like
They
it's
are.
whenever I have these conversations, I always find myself going on these tangents
Great.
because you can't have one without the other, right? Like if
Not
you're
at all.
talking about feedback, then you have to talk about performance. If you talk about performance, then you have to talk about incentives and
Correct.
compensation and benefits.
Right.
It's all that like there's and so it's this like 10-legged stool where yes, I know we're talking a lot about in this
Yeah.
conversation about feedback, right? But like if you don't hire the right people, talent acquisition, if you don't create the right incentives, right? If you don't have these
Correct.
other structures, the
Correct.
system breaks down. And so it gets back to the idea of like if you hire someone who's a glorified recruiter for your head of HR
Yeah.
role,
So that's
it's
where I
going
think
to create other
what you
problems.
said, you need a full stack HR to think this strategically, right? And
Right.
sooner the better, right? I think 50 plus, it's becoming out of hand already, right? I think you've already lost the
Yeah.
plot in terms of building that culture from grounds up because it's late. I think you were right. It's more like 30, 35 when you're just starting to sprout. I think that's where could be the right time. Love it.
Yeah.
Any parting thoughts for our audience today? Young organizations building culture, building,
Mm.
performance culture, more importantly.
Yeah. I my last thought is a reinforcement of a thought I said earlier around the piece around therapy.
Yeah,
So, as we're all aware, AI is changing like by the minute, right? Like it's kind of scary. I was reading this thing this morning about how like in 2026, so a year from now, like I mean, just like the the entire global workforce and everything is changing with our eyes. I just feel like increasingly the most important skill and what's going to separate us from the robot is our humanity, right?
that's true.
And I think that previously you could get by as a manager and as a leader by
Now you
like
can't.
maybe just like being structured and
Right.
organized and helping remove roadblocks, but like the like maybe sort of like less of the humanity piece.
Yep.
I just think all those things will increasingly be commoditized. And what
Right.
will literally be the difference between us and robots is like this,
The
right? The
emotions,
ability to
the emotions,
human
understanding, connections.
Being vulnerable, right?
Correct.
I find myself in most conversations talking about my failures more than my
Yeah.
successes because I find that that's what people appreciate. Like people appreciate when you're able to be vulnerable. And so how this ties into the topic we're talking about is like I try to be really vulnerable with my team members. I'm constantly telling them what I don't know as well as what I do know, what the mistakes I've made as well as the successes I've had. And I think that that is a skill that in interviews too, by the way,
Yeah.
I'm putting my recruiter hat.
Yeah.
Like I love when a candidate tells me about the failures that
Correct.
they've made and what they've learned from it. And so for people listening, like I think that that's something that is increasingly valued and important
True.
as you're talking to like employees and prospects. Like people want to hear the humanity. I want to hear your story.
Absolutely, Tag, and I love it. I think we had a very different direction in our mind, but I think the way you have opened up and shared your weaknesses and vulnerabilities, I think that's really really valuable. So thank you for doing that on the podcast today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for letting me go on those tangents.
No, it's all our pleasure. All right, folks, there you have it. So this was Thach Nguyen, and my name is Ashish, and I'm gonna see you off right now, and see you next time with a new guest in a new episode of the Rise Up video. Till then, you folks take care and be safe. Bye bye.